I dropped out of AmeriCorps for school, fell hard for T, but then we split, leaving me numb and questioning every passion I've built. I was raised in an extremely pacifist and affluent household, and I quickly came to understand the inherent contradiction in that situation. My intention was to attend Goshen College due to its anti-war stance, but I was accepted at New York University and opted to enroll there instead. I took a gap year to participate in AmeriCorps when the genocide in Gaza began, and I promptly withdrew from my studies. I eventually enrolled in a large public university that promised to fully fund my tuition based on my academic performance. Although I believe it was the right decision, I despise my current situation. When I first arrived, I wept for 3 consecutive days because there was no public transportation, making it impossible for me to go anywhere without a vehicle. The environment lacks people and culture. It feels utterly dull. Generally, the university comprises 80% students from financial backgrounds similar to mine, who seem uninterested in their education, as their parents finance 4 years of partying without any apparent motivation or beliefs. What frustrates me is that the impoverished students I worked with in AmeriCorps were aggressively directed towards trade schools, where they would have thrived academically. We should instead concentrate on making trade schools an acceptable alternative for these affluent students who lack enthusiasm for academics, rather than relegating that option exclusively to underprivileged individuals who never had the opportunity to explore higher education. The overwhelming majority of students seem solely focused on social events and football. Although a radical community exists, and I somewhat belong to it, it is so tightly knit that I struggle to make meaningful connections. Most local students are engaged in neighborhood politics and attending the university because they received scholarships. On the 3rd day of my arrival, I met my partner, T, at Fallfest. We quickly became close friends and began dating within a week. We expressed our love for each other by the 2nd week. I recognized that this was intense. T might attribute the intensity to me, but it was undoubtedly the most passionate relationship I have ever experienced, and that was not entirely my fault. Initially, they were overwhelmed with happiness when we spent time together, stating they never thought they could feel such powerful emotions for anyone. I had plans to study abroad in Bolivia the following semester because my scholarship covered the trip. However, once it was clear I was not departing for study abroad, T began to emotionally withdraw from the relationship. They insisted we needed to establish boundaries. I did not handle their sudden emotional retreat well and became increasingly clingy. Our relationship deteriorated over approximately 2 months, marked by a complete power imbalance where I was constantly pleading for more affection, while they sought distance to regain space. Eventually, we ended our relationship, and T claimed I did not allow them enough space to develop feelings for me. I requested we cease contact, but I broke that vow. They remarked that I made it simple for them to walk away from me. I have never felt so unlovable in my entire life. I find no joy in life. I have had suicidal thoughts since high school. The few exceptions have been fleeting connections with individuals that are invariably taken away. I do not believe people are obligated to remain alive merely for the sake of existence. I have consistently told others that contemplating suicide is akin to homicide, as you are ending your future self. Your future self experiences a different life, encounters different events, and holds different aspirations. You cannot genuinely decide on their behalf that they would not wish to live. Nevertheless, I have been grappling with depression for an extended period. I experience a profound loneliness that I do not think will resolve, and I cannot see a way out of this gloom and pain. Thus, in many respects, I fulfill my own criteria for suicide, and I do not understand why I should impose a higher standard on myself than I would on a stranger. T was the sole source of clarity that motivated me to stay alive. They instilled happiness and excitement for the future in me, and now that they are gone, I cannot envision feeling that way about anyone or anything again. Please do not worry. I do not plan to take my own life at this moment. I have a festival to attend at the end of the month with my activist friends from the city, so I need to stay alive for that. However, I am uncertain how to move forward without the person who was the only reason for my enjoyment of life. Moreover, I have numerous projects underway that I am no longer interested in. I feel like a zombie traversing the remnants of a city built by someone I can no longer recognize. One of the projects is an interfaith initiative at the university that I secured funding for, placing me in charge of money. But since I created the program with T, simply looking at my emails related to it makes me feel nauseous. Additionally, I am overseeing our college town's mutual aid newsletter and serving as a teaching assistant for a prison class. Furthermore, I am engaged in a private research project on the Convention Against Torture, which I have neglected over the past 2 weeks, putting me significantly behind, and I risk failing this class that I proposed to a professor. That embarrassment is compounded by the fact that I was once genuinely passionate about these initiatives, yet now they evoke no interest in me whatsoever. I am at a loss for what to do. Should I abandon all of these programs, or should I continue with them despite feeling emotionally numb? Ultimately, nothing seems capable of creating significant change anyway. I feel an escalating pressure from myself and my overflowing Gmail inbox. I truly struggle to envision a future on this planet any longer, as T was the only person I could imagine a future with, making it difficult to care about anything. To clarify, I do not believe that New York University is superior to the State University in terms of education or opportunities. The professors are equally capable. In fact, I was connected with the professors I am collaborating with here by my professors at NYU. My experience at NYU was richer because cities offer more vibrant experiences than college towns, and every student who gains admission to a competitive university is genuinely eager to learn and is passionate about something, creating an electrifying atmosphere. Regarding my mental health, I have battled depression and self-harm since high school. I went 3 years without self-harm, but upon experiencing a breakdown at the state university, I relapsed. Due to being on my parents' insurance, which does not support mental health treatment, I find myself almost entirely cut off from mental health care. I struggled to read until the 3rd grade, prompting my school to test me for intellectual disabilities, but my results indicated I was gifted, leading my parents to refuse any further testing. Thus, I likely have an undiagnosed learning condition. NYU suggested I get tested for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but such testing isn't covered by my insurance, and my parents have forbid me from pursuing that avenue. When Donald Trump was elected, my mother became quite concerned about reproductive health, allowing me to consult with a gynecologist and obtain a birth control method that also assists with premenstrual dysphoric disorder. I was able to meet with a therapist twice to receive the PMDD diagnosis, along with additional diagnoses of anxiety and clinical depression. However, I cannot initiate medication for those conditions since it takes 3 months for the PMDD medication to take effect, and the therapy copay is prohibitively expensive, preventing me from continuing with therapy. I feel as if I have explored numerous avenues to address my mental health issues, only to encounter obstacles at every turn. I would honestly rather die than continue trying because it seems fruitless and deeply upsets my parents. Edit, while I appreciate the suggestions, please refrain from offering me mental health advice. I am well aware of where to find free mental health services, and I understand how I should be able to access them. My student health center is supposed to provide therapy, but instead offers a master's-level student who cannot meet my needs. My county office is supposed to provide mental health support, but it simply leaves patients waiting due to lack of funding. It feels incredibly dismissive of my lived experience when people suggest that I haven't searched hard enough for these resources. I have exerted every effort to seek help, so what options do I have now that support is unavailable? I am not someone who simply concedes and fades into the darkness. I have fought earnestly to access mental health services through 3 distinct avenues: private, university-provided, and public resources. Thus, I implore you not to assert that I merely lack knowledge of where to look or how to navigate these systems. I feel as though I have become well-versed in the tangled web of mental health bureaucracy, and it is all for naught. I genuinely seek guidance on whether I should continue all of these pursuits that no longer interest me following T-Tick's departure, and whether there is any valid reason for me to carry on without them. Story 2. After 7 years, we fell in love long distance. After a breakup, she moved on, but I couldn't let go, leading to one last call to end it all. First and foremost, I want to express that I am not highly proficient in English. Therefore, I may make some errors throughout this text. It is going to be a lengthy message, but I hope you can assist me. To start, we have been acquainted for approximately 7 years now. I first met her when I was 11 years old. She had a crush on me when she was 10, but we were just children, and naturally nothing transpired between us. A few months after our initial meeting, she moved to a province completely at the opposite end of Canada, but we continued to be good friends. We connected through social media occasionally, and that was the extent of it. Nothing more and nothing less. However, last year, for some unknown reason, we both developed feelings for each other after not seeing one another for 5 years. I confessed my feelings for her during her visit to Montreal, and we began dating for nearly a year. It was a long-distance relationship. I resided in the city where we first met, while she lived in a province 6 hours away by plane. Nonetheless, we were both very committed and meant everything to one another. We used to call or video chat every night. Her presence in my life meant a great deal to me. I was significantly happier than in any previous close-distance relationship I had experienced. She was everything to me. However, just like any other relationship, we faced challenges. One day, I brought up something I should never have mentioned: breaking up. The issue was that I did not explicitly tell her I wanted to end things. She had often expressed that she wanted me to text her more frequently, sharing what I was doing, where I was going, and so on. I was completely fine with sharing those details, considering it was a long-distance relationship. I had no issue accommodating her requests. However, on days when I would forget, she was not very pleased. Therefore, I told her that she should find someone who could treat her as she desired, but I couldn't bring myself to say that because I loved her too much and could never let her go. I realize now that I should never have said that. This deeply hurt her. I had never seen her cry so much. We discussed it, and we continued dating as before. Our love for each other was strong. Yet, following that incident, she began to avoid discussing the issues in our relationship because she feared I would genuinely end things with her. As final exam season approached, I needed to devote myself entirely to studying in order to pass all my classes. Failing a final exam would result in failing the entire course. Consequently, I focused solely on studying throughout the week. I didn't go outside, eat, or engage in other activities. I informed her that I wouldn't be able to communicate with her as frequently until finals were over, and she said that was acceptable. However, it might have been too much for her. I only managed to text her once in the morning and once before bed. She wasn't fond of this change but couldn't bring herself to express her feelings. Once the exams were completed, I resumed our usual communication pattern, texting her every day. However, she seemed distant. She no longer texted me as she used to. Fast forward a week or two, one day after Christmas, she ended our relationship via text. The night before, she had expressed that she was in love with me. Apparently, she checked my Instagram story before I had a chance to text her, and she was fed up with the situation. It felt so abrupt, even though I somewhat anticipated it after the exams concluded. I was heartbroken. I cried extensively. I pleaded with her to stay, and we spoke on the phone the whole night. She said she would remain with me for just 1 more week because the breakup had come as such a shock to me, and she wanted to give me time to heal from it. During that week, I did everything within my power to make her happy. I called her multiple times and video chatted frequently. Seeing her joyful made me incredibly happy. I kept telling her that I loved her, and she reciprocated. I asked if she was merely saying it to comfort me, but she assured me that she meant it sincerely. I had no doubt about her feelings during that period. We still loved each other. However, as the week progressed, she surprisingly did not mention anything about ending our relationship. So I became convinced that we were in a good place and continued dating. Yet, a week later, she ultimately decided to end things with me. She chose to follow through with her initial inclination to break up, even after the happiest week we had shared. We spoke, and she confessed that she did love me during the first week, but by the following week, her feelings had faded. I had no choice but to let her go. We officially ended our relationship that day. For some reason, we continued to text each other daily. While our communication decreased, we still called occasionally. It felt as though we could not entirely let one another go. Therefore, I kept bringing up the idea of getting back together. I expressed how I could improve this time after my previous mistakes and that we could learn from our past errors to strengthen our relationship. However, she firmly believed that people cannot change. She felt that getting back together would only lead to the same arguments and hurt from previous situations. She refused to reconcile. I was left feeling miserable. Nothing I said seemed to change her mind. One evening, after an extensive discussion about us getting back together and other topics, her responses became increasingly brief. As I mentioned earlier, we had still been calling regularly, even post-breakup. However, after her responses became colder, I called her as usual, but she declined the call and informed me that she didn't want to talk. That somewhat shattered my heart again. I asked her if she hated me now, and she replied that she didn't, but if I continued my desperate behavior, she would. So I decided to cease communication for 2 days. During that time, I couldn't eat, sleep, study, or do anything. All I could think about was her. After those 2 days, I reached out to her to see how she was doing. I know this was not the most advisable way to contact an ex. However, she did not respond for the entire day. I sent her multiple texts and made numerous calls. I missed her dearly. I knew I shouldn't have done any of that following our breakup, but she was the only thought occupying my mind. I missed her intensely. A few moments after I called her, she informed me that she had restricted my account and could not see any of my messages. That night, we spoke, and she told me that it would be the last time we would ever communicate and that it would be her final response to any of my attempts to reach out. She had completely moved on. However, our call had to end abruptly that night, the last Monday, and we agreed to talk one final time the upcoming Sunday, tomorrow. She instructed me not to contact her before Sunday. Nevertheless, I had flowers prepared to send her for Valentine's Day specifically, an eternal dried rose that I had planned for some time. I wanted to send it to her, but since she had recently moved, I was unaware of her new address. I reached out to her friends for her address, but they all refused to share it with me. Some even ended up blocking me, likely informing her that I had reached out. I appeared desperate and foolish. I realize now that this behavior probably made it easier for her to move on. I recognize that I acted thoughtlessly. However, I continued these actions to improve my own emotional state, as I missed her immensely and struggled to endure a day without her. Last night, I drank and kept calling her. She texted me to stop, and she was extremely upset, really upset. I could sense her anger and disgust through her messages. I inquired whether she was calling me on Sunday out of pity for me, but she clarified that she was doing it to completely sever ties with me. This included ending the friendship we shared for 5 years before we started dating. She stated that we could no longer remain friends because I kept repeating the behaviors she disliked. I felt incredibly foolish. I was heartbroken. I missed her every day and struggled to carry out my daily activities. Seeing her thrive without me and actively trying to remove me from her life after once being each other's entire world devastated me. I consented to talk one last time on Sunday, and that was how my night came to a close. I feel so foolish. The thought that this Sunday would signify the end of everything we shared fills me with sadness. I should also mention that she deleted all the pictures we had together. What can I do at this point? I genuinely want her back, even though it seems practically impossible after all the foolish things I have done. But how can I win her back? The concept of her with another man shatters my heart, and I am desperate to prevent that from happening. I miss her profoundly. Most importantly, what should I say to her this Sunday? I firmly believe that if we restart our relationship, we could do it so much better this time. I really miss her. It is incredibly difficult to endure a day without her. Story 3. I ended an 11-year friendship after she let her boyfriend verbally attack me in my own home and stole my concert savings. I have been contemplating whether to share this here, but I want to determine if I am overreacting or not, and I believe this is the right place to inquire. So, I, 22-year-old female, have had my best friend, 22-year-old female, since middle school, and I have always supported her whenever she needed someone. By the end of 2023, she began to experience serious struggles with her mental health and had suicidal thoughts. Both her therapist and I advised her to seek admission to a facility, which she ultimately did. After a few months, she was discharged and returned to her parents' home. At the time, we were both in our 20s. I do not judge people who live at home given the high cost of living nowadays. However, all she did was stay in her room, playing Apex on her PlayStation, and once a day, she would take a walk to a nearby place to smoke marijuana. Her mental health continued to deteriorate, and I begged her to admit herself again because I feared she might take drastic actions. Fortunately, she agreed. I want to add that throughout this time, I was living 6 hours away in another town after my relocation in April 2023, so I could not be there physically to assist her, but we communicated daily. We also began making plans for her to move down here so we could share an apartment because her parents were negatively impacting her mental health, according to her claims. By the end of August, she moved here and stayed with me for the last month of my lease before we transitioned into a 3-bedroom place with another acquaintance of mine. We settled in, and everything seemed to be going well, but then she began saying she had a plan, expressing a desire to end her life. Each time this topic arose, I would talk her through it and help her feel better, even though the ongoing discussion was taking a severe toll on my mental health, as constantly hearing my best friend talk about suicide was painful. While we lived together, she had not been employed and was relying on a program associated with her band. She is Native American, to cover her rent and bills, yet she still required a job and was unwilling to seek one, which frustrated me immensely since I was covering all our grocery expenses and paying for every outing we had. Additionally, she started dating a guy from the United States. We reside in Canada, whom she met through Apex. He was planning to visit her for a week. I explained that I was uncomfortable with him coming over to our home, and she said she understood. About 2.5 to 3 weeks ago, I became frustrated with her and went to my parents' house to get their perspective regarding the situation. They advised me to take a step back since I had been mothering her. At the time, I was managing her medication to ensure she took it as requested. I agreed with them because I was feeling quite used. Once I returned home, I decided to take a step back and not respond to her frequent declarations of wanting to end her life, recognizing it as a manipulation tactic since she knew I would always stop whatever I was doing to talk her down. I also want to stress that she had never genuinely attempted to take her life, which informed my belief that she was not always sincere in her statements. Yes, I understand that individuals exhibit their mental health issues differently, and some might interpret her actions as a call for assistance, which I usually did. But after she persistently refused to seek professional help, whether by contacting her doctor about her medication or calling a hotline, I was reluctant to engage with her statements any longer. One day, after returning from a tough day at work, she approached me, repeatedly stating that she wants to jump off a bridge, or she wants to throw herself out of a window. Instead of my usual response, I began asking how she planned to do that, and she could not provide an answer. I then suggested that if she genuinely felt that way, she should reach out to the hotline, as that is what they are there for. Her reply was, "No, they are all losers, just professional losers." I then asked if she could call her boyfriend to talk since that typically made her feel better, as I was struggling to handle the continuous conversation about her wanting to end her life. She went to her room to call her boyfriend, and I sat in the living room, which is right outside her door, hearing everything she discussed with him. She mentioned how she could easily not be here tomorrow, and that she could simply terminate her life, adding that he was lucky she was scared of knives, which prevented her from cutting. I was infuriated because I could not bear to hear her speak about herself in that manner. I texted a friend who was aware of our situation, trying to calm myself down, but it wasn't effective, so I cleaned up after dinner and retreated to my room, locking the door to avoid reacting explosively to her words and potentially damaging our friendship. The next day, I went to work and came back home. We exchanged a few words, and I returned to my room, locking the door, where I ultimately fell asleep due to sheer exhaustion. Then, she began pounding on my door just before midnight because I hadn't given her medication yet. I handed it to her and went back to bed because I had to work again the following day. The next day, while I was at work, she arrived about 30 minutes before closing while I was assisting a customer alongside my coworker. Once I finished, I approached her to ask about her visit, and she said it was to pick me up. I inquired why she was doing that since I take the bus to and from work, and she exploded, asking if I was ungrateful for her picking me up. I explained that I was not ungrateful, just surprised. We returned home. On Friday, she wanted me to accompany her to get her monthly shot, as usual. After our errands were complete, we returned home, and I explained that I had been experiencing cramps. She responded, "Oh, so that's why you've been so distant," to which I clarified, "No, there is a reason," going on to express my distress regarding her repeated declarations of wanting to take her life and my reluctance to react explosively to her. She acknowledged my intention to maintain my composure. Fast forward to the other day, her boyfriend had been in town for a few days, and she had been staying with him each night while still coming to the house daily. I had been caring for her cat, but I informed her that I would no longer manage the litter box since she was at the house every day, and she agreed. A few days ago, she messaged me while I was working, saying we needed to have a conversation once I returned home. So when I did get home, we had a discussion. She began by saying it was unfair that she had to do everyone's dishes. She just loads and unloads the dishwasher since that is one of her chores, asserting that everyone should take care of their own. I responded neutrally, acknowledging her point. She then insisted on receiving cash up front when she gave me a ride. We have a joint account established for that purpose, but apparently that was not sufficient for her. She also began accusing me of ignoring her during her cry for help the other day and hiding in my room for days. Feeling overwhelmed, I expressed that was because I couldn't bear to hear her talk about her personal struggles in that way. Throughout our conversation, I was crying as I felt deeply hurt, while she just stared at me with indifference. She then asked her boyfriend, whom she had been seeing for about a month or two, to speak to me. He came out and verbally assaulted me, stating there was no justification for how I had acted, and that my exhaustion after working nearly 9 hours did not excuse me from washing a casserole dish. He berated me. He insisted that if she offers me a ride, I should also pay for gas, even though I hadn't asked for one. At that moment, I was furious because I found it unacceptable to be verbally attacked by a stranger in my own home. After they left, I shut myself in my room, having a full-blown anxiety attack on the phone with my dad, as I couldn't believe what had just transpired. A few minutes later, I received a banking notification indicating that the balance in our joint account had dropped below $100. There was $100 allocated for her gas money and $150 for me for an upcoming concert. She was aware I was placing my concert funds in there to avoid touching them. She had taken everything. I was now experiencing a full-blown panic attack, feeling unable to breathe. In response, I took all her medication and anything else belonging to her in my room and bathroom, throwing it onto her bed. I then wrote her a note explaining that her actions were entirely unacceptable and that, due to her behavior, we were now merely two individuals residing under the same roof. I muted her on Snapchat and Facebook, blocked her on Discord and her phone number, as well as unfollowed her on TikTok. But did I react excessively? There are additional details I have omitted because there is so much she has done that I cannot include everything here. Am I just overreacting and being a terrible friend? Story 4. My mom left my dad for my cousin, just out of prison for child molestation. Now she's living with him and ghosting me. What? I am about to share a rather unsettling story. My cousin, who is 42 years old, was released from prison 3 weeks ago after serving 13 years for child molestation. To provide context, my boyfriend, who is 26, and I, who am 20, reside right next to my cousin, as we are renting a small house from his parents. Interestingly, my mother did not visit me very often before my cousin's release. However, once he got out, she began coming over every weekend looking well put together, which struck me as unusual. She also appeared to be acting flirtatious, but I decided not to mention anything to my father at the time as I was unsure about it, considering she has cheated in the past. One day, while we were playing cards, my dad texted me to ask if my mom was alone with this particular cousin. At that moment, she was not, so I replied with a no. The following weekend, I received a phone call that abruptly woke me from my sleep. It was my father asking if I was aware that my mother had been involved with my cousin. I was taken aback, as I believed she would never betray us again after everything we have endured over the years. Despite having college classes that day, I went to my father's house beforehand to confront my mother about the situation. She simply stated, "Nothing, we are just friends." My dad insisted that she needed to find another place to stay and even took back her phone, which he pays for. For background, my parents have been married for 22 years, and my mother has only worked for a total of 3 of those years. She had just recently returned to work and lacked savings. As I prepared to leave for school, I asked my mother what her plans were. She claimed she was going to work that day, even assuring me she wouldn't visit my cousin anymore. Fast forward to after school, when I returned home and noticed her car at my cousin's parents' house, who live nearby as well. Concerned, I called my aunt, who informed me that my mother was indeed at my cousin's house. So I walked over to confront them and inquired why she wasn't at work. My mother replied that she was tired and didn't feel like going. When I questioned her about being at my cousin's house after she had said she wouldn't come anymore, she was unable to provide me with an explanation. I asked both my mom and cousin about their intentions, but they danced around the topic. I directly said, "We are all adults here, let's be honest." My cousin then confessed that he had feelings for my mother, and she admitted that she wanted to take things slowly but was open to a future relationship. I then asked what her plans were regarding her living situation, and she expressed a desire to stay with me for a while. I told her she could, but she had to refrain from any communication with my cousin out of respect for my father. She appeared to struggle with that decision. I then left them to discuss what they wanted to do regarding living arrangements, and an hour later, my mother came to my house saying, "He wants to take things slow." I reminded her that she could not stay with me if she intended to continue talking to my cousin, and I gave her a day to think it over. That night, we discussed retrieving some clothing from my dad's house. I woke up early at 9 a.m. to help her out, but to my surprise, when I woke, she was missing and back at my cousin's house. After waiting a few hours, I decided to head to class. When I returned home at 9 p.m., my mother was still at his place, so I texted my cousin, saying, "This message is for you and Mom. I've tried to be understanding, but I feel I need to be more direct since no one seems to be listening. I told Mom she could stay here, but you both cannot communicate or interact with each other, as I want to do this in respect for Dad. I do not want to sour my relationship with that side of the family due to your actions. If you wish to continue your involvement, she needs to remain with you or find somewhere else to stay. I am not going to spend the next few days unsure if someone will stay with me, or if she will be playing house with you during the day and return here to sleep, only to be back at your place before I wake up. To clarify, you both need to decide tonight what your plan is, whether you will stop communicating and she stays here, or if you will pursue your relationship and she stays with you, or if she will find her own place. Please just text me and inform me of the situation." 10 minutes later, my mother arrived at my house, ignoring the text and asking to use my phone to call my father and my younger brother. I agreed, saying I would let her know when he called. When my dad called, they spoke for 3.5 hours. The next day, we went to my dad's to collect her clothes, and she managed to persuade him to allow her to stay in the guest bedroom until she was able to support herself. The only rationale she offered was that she couldn't afford to stay with me, where I was only going to charge her $300 a month, so she claimed she would live in her car. Surprisingly, she lived with my dad for 2 days, during which they apparently spent the night together and planned to reconcile. However, I later discovered in my deleted messages that while my mom was on the phone with my father and brother that night, she was simultaneously texting my cousin through my phone, expressing her longing for him and confessing her feelings, all while telling my dad that she had no feelings for him and did not desire a relationship with my cousin. Moreover, she got herself a new phone and was texting my cousin throughout her stay at my dad's. When my dad requested her new number, she denied him, stating that she had only shared it with my cousin and a friend from work. As a result, my dad told her to leave, and they would not be reconciling. She is now living with my cousin and has not spoken to me or my brother for a week and a half. I no longer feel inclined to communicate with my mother, as I sense she has been using and deceiving me throughout this entire ordeal. I also made it clear that if she chose to live with my cousin, I would cease communication with her moving forward. It feels as though she has prioritized this man, whom she has only been speaking to for 3 weeks, over her own children. What are your thoughts on the matter?